The smell of burnt coffee filled my kitchen that Tuesday morning, but I barely noticed. My hands shook as I held the phone, hearing my daughter Sarah's broken voice on the other end. "Mom, I need to tell you something about that whiskey I sent you for your birthday 2 years ago." The line was silent for a few seconds that felt like an eternity. I knew something terrible was about to be revealed, something that would change everything between us forever. Sarah was always my special girl, my 28-year-old youngest daughter, who called me religiously every Sunday since moving to Portland with her husband, Derek. She had this sweet way of always remembering important dates, always surprising me with thoughtful gifts. On my 55th birthday, she sent me a bottle of 25-year-old Scotch whiskey, wrapped in gold paper with a red ribbon. The enclosed note read, "To the strongest woman I know, save it for a special occasion, Mom." I remember that day perfectly. It was October, and the golden leaves danced in my living room window in Denver. I had just divorced my daughter's father after 30 years of marriage and was trying to rebuild my life on my own. The bottle arrived just when I most needed to feel that I wasn't completely abandoned by the world. I held that bottle in my hands and cried, not out of sadness, but out of gratitude for having a daughter who knew me so well. But then the invitation came. Richard, my former father-in-law, my ex-husband Tom's father, was turning 75. Even with the divorce, we maintained a cordial relationship. After all, he was the grandfather of my 3 daughters. Richard had always been kind to me, unlike his son, who had cheated on me with his secretary. When my oldest daughter, Jennifer, asked me to attend his birthday party, I hesitated. Going would mean facing Tom and his new girlfriend, but it also meant showing that I was okay, that I had overcome everything. The night of the party, while getting ready, I glanced at that bottle of whiskey on the living room shelf. Richard always appreciated good spirits, and I knew it would be a perfect gift for him. Sarah wouldn't be upset if I gave it to my granddaughter's grandfather, I thought. It was a gesture of peace, a way of showing that I held no grudges against the family, even after everything I'd been through. I grabbed the bottle, put it in an elegant bag, and left the house with a heavy heart but determination. The party was taking place in the house I knew so well, where I'd spent so many Christmases and Sundays with my family. The garden was decorated with golden lights, and the smell of barbecue in the air brought back painful memories of happier times. Richard welcomed me with a warm hug, and when I handed him the gift, his eyes lit up with joy. "Margaret, you didn't have to, but thank you very much. I'll save it for a very special occasion," he said, holding the bottle with the same care I'd held it 2 months earlier. During the party, I watched Richard show the bottle to other family members, proud of the gift. Tom greeted me coolly, but his new girlfriend, a 35-year-old blonde named Brenda, treated me with a false warmth that made me nauseous. My daughters were there, Jennifer with her young children, Patricia with her boyfriend, but Sarah had stayed in Portland, saying she couldn't travel that weekend because of work. I returned home that night feeling strangely at peace. I had done the right thing, I thought. Richard deserved that gift, and I had shown maturity by attending the party. In the following days, Jennifer called me to thank me for going, saying it meant a lot to her grandfather. I felt good about my decision, proud to have chosen forgiveness over resentment. 2 weeks later, I got a call from Richard. His voice was different, weaker. He'd opened the bottle the night before to celebrate a promotion at work for Sarah's husband, Derek. "Margaret, I need to tell you something," he said, his voice hesitant. "That whiskey," there was something written on the bottom of the bottle. Some engraved words. I thought you'd like to know. My heart started beating faster. Engraved? Sarah had never mentioned anything about engraved words. What did it say? I asked, my stomach already fluttering. Richard coughed before answering. It said, "To the woman who gave me life, I love you, Sarah." Margaret, did you know that? The world stopped. My breath hitched and I had to sit down in the kitchen chair. That bottle wasn't just a birthday gift. It was something deeply personal. Something Sarah had made especially for me, with an engraved message that only I should have seen. Guilt hit me like a punch to the gut. How could I have given that to someone else? It was more than a gift. It was a declaration of love from my daughter, a message that should have remained between us. I had violated something sacred, something intimate. I spent the rest of that night awake, staring at the ceiling, trying to find a way to explain to Sarah what had happened, but the words wouldn't come. For the next few days, I avoided calling her. Every time the phone rang and I saw her name on the screen, my heart raced. How could I explain that I had given the most special gifts she had ever given me to my ex-husband's grandfather? How could I say I hadn't even noticed the message playing in the background? Shame consumed me, and I began avoiding conversations with all my daughters, afraid that Richard would tell someone about the recording. A month later, during our regular Sunday phone call, Sarah asked if I liked the whiskey. Her voice held a special anticipation, as if she were waiting for a specific reaction. "I really liked it, honey," I lied, feeling each word burn in my throat. "That was very thoughtful of you." She was silent for a moment, then asked, "Did you read the message I had engraved on the bottom of the bottle, Mom?" "All hell broke loose. What message?" I asked, feigning surprise, but my voice betrayed nervousness. Sarah laughed on the other end, a sweet, excited laugh. "Mom, I had, 'To the woman who gave me life, I love you, Sarah,' engraved on the bottom of the bottle." "I thought it would be a special surprise for you. Haven't you opened the bottle yet?" My hands began to shake violently. I had to tell the truth, but the words just wouldn't come. "I haven't opened it yet, honey. I'm saving it for a very special occasion," I replied, every word a lie that tore at me. Sarah was happy. "That's great, Mom. When you open it, you'll be so moved. It cost me a fortune to have this engraved, but you deserved something unique." After hanging up the phone, I burst into tears. I had messed up. The most special gift my daughter had ever given me was at my ex-father-in-law's house, and I had no idea how to fix it. Months passed. Every call with Sarah became torture. Every time she asked about the whiskey, I'd come up with a new excuse for not having opened it yet. "I'm waiting for a very special day," I'd say. And then, that Tuesday morning, 2 years later, the phone rang. It was Sarah, and her voice was different, broken, scared. "Mom, I need to tell you something about that whiskey I sent you for your birthday 2 years ago." My blood ran cold. Somehow she had found out. Maybe Richard had told someone. Maybe Jennifer had mentioned that I had brought a bottle to her grandfather's party. Either way, the moment I had dreaded so much had arrived. My daughter was going to discover that I had given her most special gift to someone else, that I had lied for 2 years, that I had destroyed something sacred between us. "Sarah, I can explain," I began, but she interrupted. "Mom, you need to listen to me. This isn't about explaining anything. It's about something I discovered, something terrible about that whiskey." Her voice shook in a way I'd never heard before. It wasn't anger or disappointment, it was pure fear. "Mom, that whiskey was poisoned." Sarah's words echoed in my mind like a distorted echo in a nightmare. Poisoned. The whiskey was poisoned. My right leg began to shake uncontrollably, and I had to brace myself against the kitchen counter to keep from falling. The smell of burnt coffee now seemed suffocating, mixed with the metallic taste of fear invading my mouth. "What do you mean by poison, Sarah?" I managed to whisper, my voice coming out more like a groan than words. On the other end of the line, I could hear her heavy breathing interrupted by suppressed sobs. "Mom, Derek's been in the hospital for 3 days. He drank from that bottle last Friday." My daughter's voice was broken, filled with a pain I'd never heard before. My legs finally gave way, and I slid across the counter until I sat on the cold kitchen floor. Derek in the hospital, the son-in-law I loved so much, the kind man who treated my daughter like a queen, was hospitalized because of the whiskey I should have drunk. The whiskey Sarah had sent me so lovingly, with that loving message etched in the background. The doctor said it was arsenic, Mom. Arsenic mixed with alcohol. The word arsenic ricocheted through my mind like a stray bullet. I only knew about arsenic from the mystery movies I watched on Sunday afternoons. But now this deadly substance had materialized in my reality in the most terrifying way possible. "How is this possible?" I asked, but I already knew the answer would be even more disturbing. Sarah took a deep breath before continuing. The police are investigating. They said someone injected the poison into the bottle through the cork. It was done on purpose, Mom. Someone wanted to kill me. Her words struck me like a thunderbolt. Someone wanted to kill my daughter, my Sarah, my sweet, gentle girl who had never hurt a fly, had someone who wanted her dead, and worse still, if I hadn't given that bottle to Richard, if I had kept it for myself like Sarah expected, I would be dead now, or nearly dead, agonizing in a hospital bed like Derek. The cruel irony of the situation sickened me. My accidental betrayal had saved my life, but it had doomed my son-in-law. But wait, I said, trying to organize the thoughts racing through my mind. If someone wanted to kill you, why did they poison a bottle that was meant for me? Sarah was silent for a long moment, and when she spoke again, her voice was even lower, more frightened. Mom, the police think whoever did this knew I always share everything with you. Whenever I send you something special, you invite me over and we share it together. Remember the chocolate cake I sent last year? The French perfume I brought for Christmas? She was right. It was our tradition. Sarah always made a point of being present when I opened her special gifts. It was our intimate mother-daughter moment, our sacred ritual we'd maintained since she was little. Whoever had poisoned that bottle knew our habits, our routine, our love for each other. They knew our lives all too well. Sarah, who would know about this? Who knows our routine this well? I asked, but I could already feel the ice spreading through my veins as possibilities began to form in my mind. That's the part that scares me the most. Mom, Sarah said, and I could hear in her voice that she was crying now. The list of people who know about our rituals isn't very long. Derek, obviously. Jennifer and Patricia. A few close friends here in Portland, and she hesitated, and in that hesitation, I knew something terrible was coming. And Dad. He's always known how much I like to share special gifts with you. Remember how he always teased us about how we were so attached? Tom, my ex-husband, the man who had betrayed me, who had destroyed our 30-year marriage, who had left me alone and broken at 53. The mention of his name caused something dark and cold to coil around my heart. Could he be capable of something so monstrous? Could the resentment over the divorce, over the alimony he had to pay, have transformed into something so dark that he'd tried to kill us? But then I remembered Richard's party, how Tom had greeted me coldly but without showing any overt hatred. Sarah, do you think your father would be capable of... I couldn't finish the sentence. It was too inconceivable, too horrible for words. But Sarah finished my thought. I don't know, Mom, I really don't know. The Sarah who grew up thinking he was a hero can't believe it. But the adult Sarah who saw how he treated you during the divorce, that Sarah has doubts. Her words carried a deep pain, the pain of a daughter who was being forced to see her father in a terrible light. Then something hit me like a bolt of lightning. Richard. My ex-father-in-law had drunk from that bottle. If Tom was behind the poisoning, he had just put his own father's life at risk. Sarah, what about Grandpa Richard? He drank from that bottle too. The line went silent for what felt like an eternity. What Grandpa Richard, Mom? What are you talking about? His confusion was evident, and it was then that I realized my lie was about to be exposed in the worst possible way. I need to tell you something, Sarah, I began, each word burning in my throat like acid. That bottle you sent me, I don't have it with me anymore. The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. I could hear my own heartbeat in my ears, a jagged drumbeat of panic and guilt. What do you mean, Mom? Sarah's voice had changed, grown colder, more distant. She was already beginning to understand. On Grandpa Richard's 75th birthday, 2 months after you sent me the bottle, I brought it to him as a gift. The words came out in a desperate rush, as if saying them quickly would make the betrayal less painful. I thought it would be a nice gift that you wouldn't mind. Sarah, I'm so sorry I didn't know about the recorded message. I never imagined... My voice broke completely, and I began to cry uncontrollably. The silence that followed was the most terrifying thing I've ever experienced. It wasn't just a few seconds. It was entire minutes where the only thing I could hear was my own desperate breathing and, occasionally, A muffled sigh on the other end of the line. Sarah was processing not only the fact that I had given her most special gift to someone else, but also that this action had potentially saved my life and put her grandfather in mortal danger. "Grandpa Richard drank from the bottle," she finally said, her voice now mechanical, emotionless. It wasn't a question, it was a terrible realization. "Yes," I whispered, barely able to form the word. "He called me a few weeks after the party, saying he'd opened the bottle to celebrate Derek's promotion. That's when he told me about the message recorded on the back." I could hear Sarah breathing heavily, trying to absorb the magnitude of the situation. "My message," she said, and there was a deep pain in those two words. "The message I had engraved especially for you, which cost an extra $200, Lou, which was my way of telling you how much I love you." Grandpa Richard read it. Each word was like a knife to my heart. I had destroyed something so special, so intimate, so sacred between us. "Sarah, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. If I could turn back time—" "Is he alive?" Sarah interrupted, her voice now filled with a new urgency. "Grandpa Richard, is he okay? When did he drink from the bottle?" I tried to recall the details, but my mind was clouded with guilt and panic. "It was almost 2 years ago, Sarah, right after the party. He called to tell me about the message, saying he'd opened it to celebrate Derek's promotion at work. Then something terrible occurred to me. If Richard had drunk from the same poisoned whiskey and hadn't died or gotten sick, it meant something very specific." "Mom," Sarah said, her voice shaking now, "if Grandpa Richard drank from that bottle 2 years ago and didn't get sick, that means the poison was added recently." "Very recently?" "Probably last week, just before Derek drank it." The implication of her words hit me like a speeding train. Whoever had poisoned the bottle had access to Derek and Sarah's house. They had been there recently. They might even have been there at that very moment. "Sarah, where are you now?" I asked, panic filling my voice. "Are you home? Are you alone?" I could hear noises on the other end of the line, as if she were moving around, looking around. "I'm in the hospital, Mom. I haven't left Derek's side since Friday. But our house, Jesus Christ. Mom, our house was open to a lot of people last week. We had a neighborhood party last Saturday. A lot of people came and went." Her breathing was getting faster, shallower. She was having a panic attack. "The neighborhood party," my mind raced through the possibilities. At a party like that, dozens of people would have access to the house, including the kitchen where the bottle was likely kept. Anyone could have injected the poison into the cork without being noticed. But even then, the person would have had to know exactly which bottle it was, where it was stored, and when it would be opened. This wasn't a random crime. It was something much more sinister, much more personal. Someone was hunting my daughter, and they had almost succeeded. "Sarah, breathe with me," I said, trying to control my own breathing as I listened to my daughter hyperventilating on the other end of the line. Inhale slowly. Exhale slowly. I could hear the noise of the hospital in the background, muffled voices, the constant beeping of medical equipment, the echo of hurried footsteps in the hallways. It was a scene that made me feel completely helpless, separated by thousands of miles from my daughter, who was living the worst nightmare of her life. "Mom, what if whoever did this comes back? What if they try again when Derek gets out of the hospital?" Her voice was filled with a primal terror that broke my heart. Her question forced me to confront a terrifying reality. If someone had tried to kill my daughter once and failed, there was a good chance they would try again. Determined criminals rarely give up after a first attempt, especially when the chosen method, poisoning, indicates careful planning and emotional coldness. "Sarah, have you spoken to the police about the party? Do they know that several people had access to your home?" I needed to know what was being done to protect her. What steps were being taken to find this monster who had nearly destroyed my family? Detective Martinez was here yesterday. She said they're going to investigate everyone who was at the party, but Mom... Sarah paused, and I could hear the sound of a chair creaking, as if she was settling in the hospital. "There's something I haven't told the police yet. Something about Dad." My stomach clenched painfully. Tom again. Every time his name came up in conversation, I felt like a dark cloud was looming over us. "What about him, honey?" "He showed up here in Portland 3 weeks ago." He said he was in town for work, but when I called his office to confirm, his secretary said he was on a personal vacation. The information hit me like a punch. Tom had lied to Sarah about the reason for his visit to Portland, in a city where he had no known business, at a time when he had taken a vacation he hadn't mentioned to anyone. "He came to your house?" I asked, already knowing the answer would be disturbing. "Yes, he stayed for dinner on a Thursday. Derek was working late, so we were alone and talked for hours." Sarah hesitated again, and I could sense there was more. "Mom, he asked a lot of questions about our routine. About when Derek got home from work, about our weekends, about my gifts for you. He said he wanted to send you something special for your next birthday and wanted to know what kind of things you like best." The pieces of the puzzle were falling into place in a way that made me sick. Tom knew about our gift-giving rituals. He always had ever since Sarah was little. And now he'd shown up in Portland asking specific questions about those traditions 3 weeks before the poisoning. The coincidence was too great to ignore. "Sarah, did he specifically ask about the bottle of whiskey?" My voice came out sharper than I intended, revealing the panic building in my chest. If Tom knew I'd given the bottle to Richard, if he discovered his plan had failed. "He asked if you liked the whiskey, if you'd opened it yet, if we'd had any special occasions together to drink it." Sarah was speaking faster now, as if the memories were coming back more clearly. "I said you were saving it for a very special occasion, which you hadn't opened yet. He laughed and said you were always so dramatic, always saving things for the perfect moment that never came." His words took me back to our marriage years, when Tom constantly criticized my tendency to save nice things for special occasions. The memory brought a wave of anger that surprised me with its intensity. Tom had always mocked my sentimentality, the way I saved beautiful gifts, expensive perfumes, special clothes for occasions he said would never come. It was one of the many subtle ways he had undermined my self-esteem over the years. And now, this very trait of mine he so criticized had apparently been part of his plan to kill me. The irony was cruel and revealing of how well he thought he knew me. "Sarah, listen carefully," I said, trying to keep my voice steady despite the tremor in my hands. "You need to tell Detective Martinez everything, every detail of your father's visit, every question he asked, and you need to ask for police protection." The thought of my daughter alone in that hospital, vulnerable and scared, while a potential killer roamed freely, made me desperate. "Can they put security with you?" "Mom, do you really think Dad would try to kill me?" The question came out as a broken whisper, filled with the pain of a daughter forced to contemplate the unthinkable about her own father. I closed my eyes, trying to find an answer that wouldn't be devastating to her, but knowing that honesty was more important than protecting her feelings. "Sarah, I don't want to believe this. For 30 years I thought I knew this man, but the man who cheated on me, who lied for months, who was cruel during the divorce, this man is capable of things I never imagined." The silence that followed was heavy, filled with the pain of a family being torn apart by terrible suspicions. Then Sarah spoke again, her voice more controlled, more determined. "There's something else, Mom. Something that's been bothering me ever since Derek was hospitalized. Remember Brenda, Dad's girlfriend? How could I forget? The 35-year-old blonde who had destroyed my marriage, who had been the reason I was alone at 53, starting my life over from scratch. What about her? She works as a nurse in Portland, at the General Hospital, in the same complex where Derek is now hospitalized." Sarah's words fell like stones in my stomach. "Brenda worked in a hospital. She had access to medications, knew about toxic substances, knew how to administer drugs without leaving obvious traces, and most importantly, she would have been in a position to know exactly when Derek was admitted, what his condition was, and whether or not he would survive. Mom, do you think—" "I think you two are in far more danger than we realized," I interrupted, my mind racing with the implications. If Tom and Brenda were working together, they had the resources, knowledge, and motivation to try again. Tom knew our family habits. Brenda had the medical knowledge to choose the right poison, and perhaps even administer an antidote if necessary. It was a terrifying combination. "Sarah, you need to get out of this hospital now." I can't leave Derek, she said, but I could hear in her voice that she was beginning to grasp the gravity of the situation. Mom, what if she tries to do something to him? What if she tries to finish what she started? The possibility was real and terrifying. Derek was vulnerable, sedated, dependent on medical equipment. If Brenda wanted to finish the job, it would be relatively easy for a nurse to gain access to his room, adjust medications, and cause complications that would seem natural. Then we'll protect him, I said, a fierce determination taking hold of me. I had failed as a mother by giving that special gift to someone else. I had lied to my daughter for 2 years. I had nearly lost my family because of my own negligence. But I wasn't going to fail now. Sarah, I'm going to Portland. Today. I'll catch the first flight I can. The decision was out of my mouth before I even knew I'd made it. But as soon as I said it, I knew it was the only right thing to do. Mom, you don't have to... Sarah began, but I cut her off. Yes, I do. My daughter and son-in-law are in danger, and I'm not going to sit here in Denver moping and feeling guilty while you guys face this alone. I got up from the kitchen floor, feeling renewed energy coursing through my veins. It was time to stop being a victim of circumstance and start fighting for my family. In the meantime, you call Detective Martinez and tell her everything about your father's visit and about Brenda. What about the bottle, Mom? About you giving it to Grandpa Richard? The question made me hesitate for a moment. Telling the police about my lie would completely expose my failure as a mother, revealing that I had betrayed my daughter's trust in the most painful way possible. But it could also be the key to solving the case. If Richard was fine after drinking from the bottle 2 years ago, it proved the poisoning had been recent, significantly narrowing the time frame and the list of suspects. Yes, about that too, I replied, swallowing my pride. The police need to know everything, Sarah. Every detail could be important in finding whoever did this to you. I walked to the living room window, looking out at the quiet street in my Denver neighborhood. In a few hours, I'd be in Portland, immersed in a nightmare I'd inadvertently helped create. But for the first time in years, I felt like I had a clear purpose, a defined mission. Mom, Sarah said, her voice calmer now, stronger. Thank you for coming. I know you're scared, I know this is crazy, but I need you here. Her words warmed my heart in a way I hadn't felt in a long time. Despite all my mistakes, despite the lie about the bottle, my daughter still needed me, still wanted me around in her darkest moments. I'll always be here for you, sweetheart. Always. After hanging up the phone, I stood in the living room for a few minutes, absorbing the magnitude of what I was about to face. In Portland, I would not only have to deal with a hospitalized son-in-law and a terrified daughter, but also potentially confront my ex-husband, who could be a potential murderer. I would have to face Brenda, the woman who had destroyed my marriage and who could now be trying to literally destroy my family. And I would have to do all of this while carrying the weight of guilt for having lied about the most special gift my daughter had ever given me. But as I rushed to my room to pack, another worry began to creep into my mind. If Tom really was behind the poisoning, if he had planned to kill both Sarah and me, then my trip to Portland might be putting us all in even greater danger. I was moving directly into his territory, where he and Brenda had the upper hand, knew the terrain, had resources and connections. Perhaps I was walking straight into a trap, but looking out the window toward the west, knowing my daughter was there waiting for me, I knew there was no choice. Family is family, and some battles must be fought, no matter how daunting. Portland Airport greeted me with a light, persistent rain that seemed to perfectly reflect my emotional state. It was almost 11 at night when I finally got a flight. It's now, in the early hours of Wednesday morning, I found myself in unfamiliar territory, carrying only a small suitcase and a heart heavy with guilt and fear. The smell of strong coffee from the airport's 24-hour cafes mingled with the dank aroma wafting through the automatic doors, creating a surreal atmosphere that made me question whether I was truly living this nightmare or if it was just a bad dream from which I would soon awaken. Sarah met me in the arrivals area, her face swollen from crying and dark circles under her eyes that betrayed sleepless nights. When I saw her, my heart completely broke. My strong, independent daughter looked like a frightened child, lost in a world that had become hostile and dangerous overnight. We embraced right there in the midst of the hustle and bustle of people, and I felt her body tremble against mine. "How's Derek?" I asked when we finally parted, though I could already see the answer in her exhausted face. "The doctors say he'll recover, but it will take time. The arsenic damaged his kidneys and liver, but fortunately he didn't drink enough to... She couldn't finish the sentence, but I understood. My son-in-law had barely survived and would likely deal with the consequences of that poisoning for the rest of his life. We walked in silence to her car, a blue Honda Civic I'd helped her buy when she graduated from college. Now, that car represented our desperate escape to a hospital where my son-in-law was battling a poison that should have killed me. On the drive to the hospital, Sarah told me she'd spoken to Detective Martinez the night before. She said they're going to question Dad and Brenda this morning, separately, to see if their stories add up. Her hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles were white. "Mom, I still can't believe Dad would do this. Even with everything he did to you during the divorce, trying to kill his own daughter it's just too monstrous." I could hear in her voice the internal conflict that was tearing her apart. The daughter who still loved her father battling, the grown woman who was beginning to see reality. Portland General Hospital was a sprawling, intimidating complex, with several buildings connected by covered walkways. As we walked the hallways to Derek's unit, I couldn't help but glance at every nurse I passed, wondering if any of them were Brenda. Sarah sensed my tension. She works in Building C in the cardiology ward. Derek is in Building A in toxicology. There was a distinct relief in her voice, as if the physical distance between the two buildings offered some protection. Derek was awake when we arrived in the room, but he looked like a shadow of the vibrant man I knew. His skin had a yellowish tint that betrayed liver damage, and there were tubes and wires connected to him from multiple directions. When he saw me, he tried to smile, but the effort seemed painful. "Hi, Margaret. Sorry to worry you like this." Even in that state, he was caring about others. It was exactly the kind of kindness that had endeared me to him since the first day Sarah brought him to meet the family. "You don't have to apologize for anything." "Dear," I said, holding his hand which felt too fragile in mine. "How are you feeling?" He took a deep breath before answering, clearly making an effort to appear stronger than he felt, better than yesterday. "The doctors say the worst is over, but it will take a few weeks for me to feel back to normal." Sarah sat in the chair on the other side of the bed and held his other hand. Seeing them like this, united in grief but still supporting each other, made me feel a mixture of pride and fury. Pride in their strength, fury at whoever had caused that pain. Detective Martinez arrived around 10 in the morning. She was a middle-aged Latina woman with intelligent eyes and a demeanor that conveyed both authority and compassion. She greeted us and asked to speak with me privately in the hallway. "Sarah told me about the bottle, about you giving it to your ex-father-in-law. I need to know all the details." Her voice was professional but non-judgmental, which gave me the courage to tell the whole truth, including the lies I'd been telling Sarah for 2 years. "So Mr. Richard drank from the bottle 2 years ago and had no health problems?" the detective asked, jotting notes in a small notebook. When I confirmed this, she nodded thoughtfully. "This confirms our theory that the poison was introduced recently, probably last week between the party at their house and Friday when Derek drank." She looked me straight in the eye. "Margaret, do you believe your ex-husband would be capable of trying to kill you and your daughter?" The question hit me like a punch, even though I was expecting it. "Detective, 6 months ago I would have said it was impossible. But the man who cheated on me, who lied for months about the affair, who was cruel and vindictive during the divorce, this man is a stranger to me. I don't know what he's capable of anymore." My own words surprised me with their brutal honesty. I was admitting to myself, perhaps for the first time, that the man I had lived with for 30 years was a stranger. "And Brenda, his girlfriend?" the detective continued. "Does she have access to medication, knowledge of toxic substances?" I nodded, feeling a chill run down my spine. She's a registered nurse, works in the cardiology ward right here at the hospital. If anyone knew how to administer arsenic in a way that wouldn't be immediately fatal, it would be her. The detective wrote everything down carefully and then gave me a piece of information that made my blood run cold. We checked Brenda's work records. She was scheduled last Friday, the same shift Derek was admitted to the hospital. In fact, she was on duty in triage when he arrived. The implications were terrifying. Not only could Brenda have poisoned the bottle, but she had also been present when Derek was hospitalized. She could have sabotaged the treatment, altered medications, caused complications. "Are you going to arrest her?" I asked, desperate for some assurance of safety. "We don't have enough evidence to make an arrest yet. Being at the hospital isn't a crime, and she had a legitimate reason to be there. She was working. But we're investigating her every move that night, checking security cameras, speaking with other staff." The detective closed her notebook and looked at me with a serious expression. "Margaret, I need you to understand something. If Tom and Brenda are really behind this, you're still in danger. Just because their initial plan failed doesn't mean they're giving up." Her words confirmed my worst fears. I returned to Derek's room with an even heavier weight on my chest, knowing our presence there could be putting us all at risk. Sarah looked at me for news, and I had to decide how much to tell her without causing unnecessary panic. "The police are investigating everything. They're going to question your father and Brenda today." I left out the more terrifying details about Brenda having been on duty the night of the poisoning. Around noon, a different nurse came into the room to check Derek's vitals. She was a young, red-haired woman with a gentle smile that contrasted with the tension we were all feeling. But when she left, Sarah pulled me aside. "Mom, did you see her name tag? It said cardiology unit. Why would a cardiology nurse be here in toxicology?" My heart raced. Had Brenda sent someone to monitor Derek? Were they being watched? I decided to investigate. I slipped out of the room and followed the red-headed nurse down the halls to the elevators. She pressed the button for the ground floor, not Building C, where cardiology was located. When the doors closed, I could see through the small window that she was talking on the phone, gesturing excitedly. I ran back to the room, my heart pounding so hard I was sure everyone could hear it. "Sarah, we need to get out of here now!" "What happened?" Derek asked, trying to sit up in bed despite the obvious pain. "That nurse wasn't from toxicology. She lied about where she works, and now she's downstairs talking suspiciously on the phone." Sarah paled completely. "Do you think she was spying on us? Reporting our presence to someone?" I didn't want to scare Derek further, but the possibility was too real to ignore. "Derek, can you walk?" I asked, already knowing the answer would probably be no, but desperate for options. He tried to move his legs, but groaned in pain. Not too far and not too fast. Sarah looked at me with panic in her eyes. "Mom, we can't take him out of here. He needs his medication, his medical monitoring." She was right, but staying also seemed dangerous. We were trapped in a place where our enemies might have access, resources, and knowledge we didn't. Just then my phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize, but something told me to answer. "Hello?" The voice on the other end was familiar, but cold in a way I'd never heard before. It was Tom. "Hi, Margaret. I heard you're in town. What an interesting coincidence." My hand started to shake as I held the phone. How did he know I was in Portland? How had he gotten my number if I'd moved after the divorce? "Tom, what do you want?" "I want to talk to you and our daughter about this whole situation with Derek." His voice was almost casual, as if we were discussing the weather. "The police were here today asking ridiculous questions, and I think it's time we set the record straight." I looked at Sarah, who was watching my expression, and clearly sensing something was very wrong. "I have nothing to discuss with you, Tom." My voice came out stronger than I expected. "Oh, but you do. Especially about that bottle of whiskey you gave my father." His tone changed, became darker, more menacing. "You had no idea what a special gift you were passing on, did you?" It was confirmation. Tom knew about the poisoning, knew I'd given the bottle to Richard. But even scarier, he seemed pleased by it, as if my accidental betrayal had been part of some larger plan I couldn't comprehend. "You have 15 minutes to go down to the parking lot." "Margaret, alone?" Tom's voice echoed in my ear like a death sentence. "If you don't show up, or if you bring the police, I'm going up there and we'll have our talk in front of Derek. I don't think he's in any more stress, do you?" The threat was clear and dire. Tom knew exactly where we were, knew about Derek's fragile condition, and was using that as leverage to force me to meet him alone. My hand was shaking so badly I almost dropped the phone. "Mom, what did he say?" Sarah asked as soon as I hung up, but I couldn't find the words. How could I explain to my daughter that her father, the man who had raised her, who had been present at her graduations and wedding, was now threatening her so coldly and calculatingly? Derek tried to sit up in bed, his eyes still yellowed from the arsenic damage, fixed on me with a determination that belied his physical fragility. "Margaret, you're not going down to him. It's obviously a trap." But I knew I had no choice. Tom had made it clear that if I didn't show up, he'd come to the room, putting both Derek and Sarah in direct danger. At least in the parking lot, there would be other people around, security cameras, and the ability to call for help if things got out of hand. "You two stay here and lock the door," I said, trying to sound braver than I felt. "If I'm not back in half an hour, call Detective Martinez." Sarah gripped my arm tightly, her fingers digging into my skin. "Mom, for God's sake, you can't go meet him alone." "What if he's armed? What if it's an ambush?" Her worries echoed my own fears, but looking at Derek lying in that hospital bed, a victim of a poison that should have killed me, I knew I couldn't put my family in any more danger. "Sarah, 30 years ago I married this man thinking I knew him. Maybe it's time to find out who Tom really is." I kissed her forehead and walked toward the door, ignoring her desperate protests. The elevator ride to the ground floor felt like the longest descent of my life. Each floor brought me closer to a confrontation that could end in my death, but could also finally reveal the truth about what had happened to my family. My reflection in the polished metal of the elevator doors showed a 57-year-old woman who seemed to have aged a decade in just a few days. My gray hair was disheveled, my eyes red with fatigue and fear. But there was something else, a determination I hadn't felt in years. The hospital parking lot was a maze of concrete and shadows, dimly lit even on a cloudy Portland day. The smell of rain and motor oil hung in the humid air, creating an atmosphere straight out of a film noir. I searched for Tom among the cars, my heart pounding so hard I was sure he could hear it from afar. That's when I saw him, leaning against a black pickup truck I didn't recognize, wearing a dark coat that made him look even more sinister than I remembered. Tom had changed since I'd last seen him at Richard's party. He was thinner, paler, and there was something in his eyes I'd never noticed before, a coldness that made me wonder how I'd lived with this man for 3 decades without noticing this capacity for cruelty. "Punctual as always, Margaret. One of the few qualities of yours I've always admired." His voice had a casual tone that contrasted grotesquely with the situation. It was as if we were discussing the weather, not attempted murder. "You tried to kill me," I said bluntly. "There was no point in pretending this meeting was about anything else. And when you failed, you ended up poisoning Derek." Tom laughed, a low, bitter sound that made my skin crawl. "Oh, Margaret, always so dramatic. I didn't try to kill you. If I wanted you dead, you would be dead. What I did was try to teach you a lesson about consequences." His words made no sense, but there was a twisted logic in his tone that frightened me even more than open anger. "What lesson? What consequences?" I asked, trying to understand the twisted mind behind this elaborate plan. Tom stepped away from the pickup and walked slowly toward me, his hands in his coat pockets in a way that made me instinctively recoil. "You ruined my life, Margaret. You made me pay child support for years, took half of everything I built, turned my daughters against me. I thought it was only fair to return the favor." The distortion of reality in his words was shocking. He truly believed he was the victim in this situation. "You betrayed me," I exploded. all the anger and pain of the past few years finally finding an outlet. You lied for months, slept with your secretary, humiliated me in front of the entire town. I didn't ruin your life. You destroyed ours. For a moment, I saw something that might have been embarrassment cross his face, but it was quickly replaced by an expression of pure malice. And yet you remained the perfect victim, weren't you? Poor Margaret, abandoned by her cruel husband. People felt so sorry for you. The unnecessary cruelty of his words hit me like physical slaps. It was as if he were trying to break me psychologically before doing anything physical. If you wanted to hurt me, why poison a bottle Sarah sent me? Why involve our daughter in this? This was the part that confused and angered me the most. Even if Tom hated me enough to try to kill me, how could he use Sarah's love as a weapon against me? Because I wanted you to feel what I felt when you lost everything, he said, his eyes shining with cruel satisfaction. I wanted you to see your daughter's love turn to disgust when she discovered what kind of mother you really are. His words confused me even more. What kind of mother am I really? Tom laughed again, that terrible sound that was starting to make me sick. The kind who gives her daughter's most special gift to someone else. The kind who lies for 2 years about it. The kind who fails as a mother in every way imaginable. The realization hit me like a bolt of lightning. Tom had known about my lie even before he poisoned the bottle. He had planned everything based on my predictable behavior, my tendency to try to please everyone, including his family. You knew I would give the bottle to Richard, I said, not as a question, but as a terrifying realization. This whole plan hinged on me betraying my own daughter. Tom nodded, clearly proud of his sophisticated psychological manipulation. Of course you knew. 30 years of marriage to me have taught you to do anything to avoid confrontation, to maintain family peace. When I learned Sarah had sent you that special whiskey, I knew exactly what I would do. Save it for a special occasion that would never come, or give it to a family member when social pressured. Her words revealed an intimate and disturbing knowledge of my psychology, a manipulation that had begun decades before the actual poisoning. And Dad's party was the perfect opportunity. So you poisoned the bottle knowing I'd give it to Richard? You tried to kill your own father? I asked, horrified by the calculated coldness of his plan. Tom shook his head, and for a moment he seemed almost human again. No, Margaret, I didn't poison the bottle before the party. Richard actually drank the whiskey clean. His revelation left me completely confused. If the bottle wasn't poisoned when Richard drank it, then when? I poisoned the bottle last week, Tom continued, as if explaining something obvious to a child. When I visited Sarah in Portland, I located where you kept the bottle she thought she'd sent you. It was easy to inject arsenic through the cork. Brenda taught me the technique. The plan was for you two to drink it together on your next birthday, as you always did with special gifts. His words painted a picture of premeditation that made me sick. He had spent years studying our family patterns, searching for the cruelest way to destroy us. But Derek drank first, I said, beginning to understand the magnitude of Tom's cruelty. He had planned for Sarah and me to die together, mother and daughter united in death as we had been in life, but chance had interfered with his plans. And now you're furious because your plan failed. Tom laughed again, but this time there was genuine frustration in his voice. Not furious, Margaret. Adaptive. Plans change. What matters is that you understand that I still have control over your life. It was then that I realized Tom wasn't alone. A familiar figure stepped out from behind a white van parked a few rows behind him. It was Brenda, dressed in civilian clothes but carrying a medical bag that made my blood run cold. She walked toward us with the confidence of someone executing a carefully rehearsed plan. "Hi, Margaret," she said with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Tom has told me so much about you. We're finally getting to know each other better." Brenda's presence completely transformed the dynamic of the situation. I was no longer dealing just with my mentally unstable ex-husband. I was facing a team with medical expertise access to drugs, and seemingly no moral qualms. "What do you want?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady despite the terror building in my chest. Brenda opened the case and removed a syringe, examining it against the gray light filtering through the clouds. "We want justice," Tom said, but his words sounded hollow and distorted. "You're going to come with us quietly, Margaret. We're going to take a short trip to a place where we can talk without interruptions." Brenda leaned closer, the syringe now clearly visible in her hand. "Don't worry, it won't hurt. It's just a mild sedative. When you wake up, we'll have time to explain properly why you need to pay for what you did to our family." I backed up until I was leaning against a car, realizing they had purposely cornered me in that isolated spot in the parking lot. The syringe in Brenda's hand gleamed in the dim parking lot light like a nightmare promise. My body was pressed against the cold metal of a blue sedan, and I could feel panic beginning to seize my muscles, threatening to paralyze me completely. But something inside me, perhaps the pent-up anger from years of manipulation, perhaps the maternal instinct to protect my daughter, refused to give in. "Do you think you'll get away with all this?" I asked, stalling for time as I desperately searched for an escape route or someone who could help me. Tom laughed, that cruel sound I was learning to hate more by the second. "Margaret, who's going to believe you? A 57-year-old divorced, bitter woman who lied to her own daughter for years about a gift? Against a respected man in the community and a registered nurse who saves lives every day." His words carried the confidence of someone who had planned every angle, every possible challenge to his plan. Brenda nodded, taking a step closer, the syringe now pointed directly at me. "Besides," Brenda added in an eerily calm voice, "accidents happen all the time. Older women have heart attacks, especially when they are under extreme stress because of a hospitalized son-in-law. She spoke about my death as if she were discussing the lunch menu, with a professional coolness that made me realize she'd done this before, or at least thought about it in enough detail to sound completely natural. "The arsenic is already out of Derek's system. When you die, the investigation will focus on finding who poisoned the bottle, not on us." It was then that I heard the most beautiful sound in the world. Police sirens in the distance gradually growing louder. Tom and Brenda heard it too there, faces instantly changing from grim confidence to suppressed panic. "Holy shit," Tom muttered, looking around the parking lot as if searching for an exit that wouldn't compromise their plan. Brenda quickly put the syringe back in her case, but not before glaring at me with a rage that promised this wasn't over. "Did you call the police, you bitch?" Tom hissed, taking a menacing step toward me. "No," I answered honestly, "but I thank God someone called." The sirens were getting closer, and I could see blue and red lights reflecting off the windows of the parked cars. Tom grabbed Brenda by the arm, pulling her toward the black pickup truck. "Let's go. Now." But Brenda resisted for a moment, her eyes fixed on me with an intensity that made me realize she was perhaps even more dangerous than Tom. "We can't let her go like this. She'll tell the police everything." "And what do you suggest?" Tom asked impatiently, clearly torn between the urge to flee and Brenda's bloodthirsty logic. It was then that Brenda did something that chilled me to the bone. She smiled. It wasn't a normal human smile. It was the expression of a predator who had found the perfect prey. "We improvise," she said, pulling the syringe out of her case again. "If she dies here and now, of a sudden heart attack caused by stress, no one will question it. I'm a nurse. I can attest that I tried to save her. Her plan was simultaneously simple and horrific. Inject me with something that would cause a heart attack, pretend to revive me when the police arrived, and emerge as the heroine who tried to save her boyfriend's distraught ex-wife. It was brilliant in a sick way, and it probably would have worked if I hadn't done something desperate immediately. "Help!" I screamed with all the strength I could muster, my voice echoing off the concrete structures of the parking lot. "Help! Someone help me!" My shout had an unexpected effect. People began appearing from various directions. Hospital visitors, staff on break, drivers arriving or departing. Tom and Brenda suddenly found themselves at the center of a lot of unwanted attention, with witnesses everywhere and police sirens fast approaching. "Shit, shit, shit," Tom repeated like a mantra, clearly not prepared to improvise under pressure. Brenda, on the other hand, quickly put away the syringe and assumed the role of concerned Samaritan. "Is everything okay here?" asked a middle-aged man in scrubs, clearly a hospital employee who had stepped outside for a smoke. His eyes went straight to me, probably because I looked visibly panicked. "She was screaming for help," he said to Tom, but there was suspicion in his voice. Brenda immediately stepped forward, putting on a mask of professional concern that would have been convincing if I hadn't known the truth. "She's my stepdaughter," Brenda lied smoothly. "She's going through a really hard time. Her son-in-law is hospitalized for poisoning. I think she's having an anxiety attack." Her performance was so convincing that for a moment even I almost believed her. But the hospital worker didn't seem entirely convinced, especially when he noticed Tom, who was clearly agitated and sweating despite the chilly Portland weather. "Maybe we should take her inside to the emergency room," the man suggested. The sirens were now very close, and he could see the first police cars pulling into the parking lot. Tom made a desperate decision. "Brenda, let's go, now!" He pulled her forcefully toward the pickup truck, completely ignoring the other people. This was the cue the hospital worker needed. No one abandons a stepdaughter having an anxiety attack to run from the police unless something was seriously wrong. "Hey, wait a minute," he shouted, but Tom was already pushing Brenda into the truck. It was then that Detective Martinez appeared, emerging from a police car that had parked blocking the nearest exit. She wasn't alone. There were at least 4 other officers with her, all with their weapons drawn. "Thomas Mitchell, stop where you are," she shouted through a megaphone. "You're surrounded." Tom paused with his hand on the pickup's door handle, his shoulders slumping in obvious defeat. Brenda, on the other hand, tried one last desperate gamble. She ran toward me, the syringe back in her hand. "If I can't have him, no one can." She screamed, a veneer of sanity finally slipping to reveal the madness beneath. But the hospital worker who had first responded to my screams was faster than either of us expected. He threw himself between us, knocking Brenda to the wet parking lot. The syringe flew from his hand, skidding several feet before shattering against one of the concrete columns. "I'm Dr. James Patterson, head of hospital security," he said, holding Brenda to the ground with surprising strength. "And you're under arrest." The revelation that the man who had saved me was actually an undercover police officer working hospital security made me dizzy with relief. It had all been a setup. The police had been monitoring Tom and Brenda, knowing they would eventually make a desperate move. "How did you know?" I asked Detective Martinez as other officers handcuffed Tom and Brenda. They were both shouting about their rights, about how this was a setup, but their words sounded hollow and desperate now that they were caught red-handed. "Sarah called us," Detective Martinez explained, holstering her weapon now that the immediate danger had passed. "When you didn't return when you promised, she panicked and called us. We were already monitoring Tom's phones. That's how we knew about the parking lot meeting." She looked at me with a mixture of admiration and disapproval. "What you did was very brave, but also very dangerous. If Dr. Patterson hadn't been around..." The thought of what could have happened made me shake violently. Tom and Brenda would have killed me right there, in a hospital parking lot, surrounded by people who could have helped me if they knew the truth. "They really were going to kill me," I said, more to myself than to the detective. 30 years of marriage, and he was really going to kill me over child support and wounded pride. The magnitude of the betrayal, not just the affair, but the attempted murder, finally hit me fully. As Tom and Brenda were bundled into separate police cars, Tom yelled something that stopped me in my tracks on the way back to the hospital. "You were never good enough, Margaret. For me, for the girls, for anyone. You're a failure as a woman, as a mother, as everything." His words were designed to hurt me one last time, to plant seeds of doubt that would grow even after he was arrested. But something had changed in me during those terrifying minutes in the parking lot. "Tom," I said, walking to the window of the police car where he sat, his hands cuffed behind his back. "For 30 years I believed your words. I let you make me feel small, insignificant, insufficient. But do you know what I discovered today?" He looked at me with pure hatred, but there was also something else, a reluctant curiosity. "I discovered that a failed woman like me was brave enough to face a murderer to protect her family. And you're just a pathetic man who tried to kill his own daughter out of revenge." Her last words to me were a string of obscenities that were muffled when the police car door closed. Brenda, in the other car, stared at me through the window with an expression that somehow managed to be both defeated and promising future revenge. But I no longer cared about her silent threats. The nightmare was finally over, and for the first time in years, I felt truly free. The hospital corridor had never felt so long as I walked back to Derek's room, my mind still processing the surreal events of the last 45 minutes. My shirt was damp with cold sweat, my hands were still shaking steadily, and there was a lingering metallic taste in my mouth that I knew was pure residual fear. Detective Martinez walked beside me, talking over the radio about the details of the arrest, but his words were too obvious for long. All I could think about was how close I'd come to losing my life because of a man I'd loved for decades but never really known. As the elevator doors opened on the 8th floor, I could hear agitated voices coming from the direction of Derek's room. Sarah was clearly panicked, and I could hear Derek's faint voice trying to calm himself. My heart sank, thinking about what they'd been through while I was away. First seeing me from a dangerous encounter with a possible killer, then going without news for nearly an hour. When I appeared at the door, Sarah rushed to me with tears streaming down her face, hugging me so tightly that I nearly fell over. "Mom, thank God you're okay," I thought. "When you didn't come back, I called the police, and they said they'd intercept it, but we didn't know if we'd get there in time." Her words came out in a desperate rush, laced with solutions that revealed the terror she'd felt. Derek was sitting up in bed, his eyes still yellow but alert and worried. "Margaret, what happened downstairs?" "We heard sirens. We saw the lights through the window." His voice was stronger than it had been that morning, a sign that his body was finally beginning to recover from the poison. "Tom and Brenda were arrested," I said simply, not wanting to go into details about how they died. But Sarah knew me too well to accept such a concise answer. "Mom, you look pale and shaking. What did they do to you?" Detective Martinez stepped forward, saving me from having to relive those terrifying moments immediately. "Your mother was very warm, Sarah. She helped gather enough evidence to ensure Tom and Brenda are charged with attempted murder." Over the next hour, Detective Martinez explained the details of the investigation he had been conducting over the past few days. Tom had been caught buying injection equipment at a medical supply store 3 days before the poisoning. Security cameras at the hospital showed Brenda in areas where she shouldn't have been, including near the toxicology ward where Derek was being treated. Phone records revealed numerous calls between Tom and Brenda in the weeks leading up to the poisoning, far more than would be expected for a casual relationship. But what convinced us most that they were working together was the discovery at Tom's house, the detective continued. "We found literature on arsenic, including medical journals that described sublethal dosages and symptoms. We also found a small bottle hidden in his garage that tested positive for arsenic residue. The idea of Tom researching ways to poison people, planning our deaths with the same methodical approach he used to run his business, excited me. It was a coolness I never imagined he possessed." Sarah held my hand throughout the explanation, her fingers intertwined with mine in a way that reminded me of when she was little and scared during thunderstorms. "Detective Martinez, how long are they going to be held?" she asked, her voice still frightening, but with a note of determination that filled me with pride. "With the evidence we have, attempted murder, conspiracy, illegal possession of controlled substances, we're talking at least 20 years, possibly longer if we can prove premeditation, which seems quite likely given the research materials. Derek, who had remained mostly silent during the briefing, finally spoke. So what happens now? Can they try something from prison? Hire someone? His concerns weren't paranoid. They were the practical concerns of someone who had nearly died because of other people's revenge. Detective Martinez nodded reassuringly. Tom doesn't have the financial resources for that kind of thing. The visual drains too much of his assets. And Brenda doesn't have the connections or money to pull something like that off. You're safe. In the days that followed, as Derek slowly recovered and Tom and Brenda awaited his arraignment, our family began the slow process of healing. Jennifer and Patricia traveled to Portland, creating a support system I hadn't felt in years. All three girls were devastated by the revelation about their father, but also relieved that the threat was over and that Derek was going to be okay. It was surreal to watch them process the fact that the man who raised them had tried to murder their mother and accidentally poisoned their brother-in-law. The hardest part for me was facing the conversation Sarah and I would have to have about the bottle of whiskey. On the third night after the arrests, as Derek slept soundly for the first time since his poisoning, Sarah and I sat in the hospital cafeteria with terrible coffee and a vending machine full of cookies, finally ready to address the elephant in the room. Mom, about the gift you gave Grandpa Richard. She began, her voice soft but direct. I need to understand why you didn't tell me. Sarah, there are no words for how sorry I am, I began, feeling the familiar burn of guilt in my throat. When you sent me that bottle, I was still raw from the divorce, still trying to prove to myself and everyone else that I was okay, that I hadn't been destroyed by what your father did to me. When Grandpa Richard's birthday came around, giving him that beautiful bottle felt like a way to show that I was gracious, mature, and above petty revenge. The words rang hollow even to me, selfish rationalizations for what had ultimately been a betrayal of my daughter's trust. But you knew you were special to me, Sarah said, and there was pain in her voice, but not anger. You knew I'd saved up money to make exactly what I wanted to give you. I nodded, tears beginning to blur my vision. I knew, and I was ashamed the moment I gave you. But then, when Grandpa Richard called to tell me about a recorded message, I realized I'd done something unforgivable, and instead of telling you the truth, I lied to protect myself from your disappointment. The admission hung between us like a physical thing. Sarah was quiet for a long moment, stirring her coffee absently as she processed my confession. Mom, you know the worst part isn't that you gave it away. The worst part is that you thought I'd love you less because of a mistake. Her words hit me harder than any anger. For 2 years, you carried this guilt instead of just telling me the truth. You robbed us of the chance to work through this together, like a family should. I was so afraid of disappointing you, I whispered, finally allowing myself to cry freely. After everything that happened with the divorce, after feeling so failed as a wife, I couldn't bear the thought of failing as a mother too. Sarah reached across the table and took my hands in hers. They were warm and firm, much stronger than when she'd been a little girl, asking me to check for monsters under the bed. Now she was the one comforting me, helping me face the monster I'd become, my own fear and shame. Mom, listen to me carefully, Sarah said, her voice firm but loving. You are not a failure. What happened to Dad was his choice, his betrayal, his moral failing. Giving me my gift was a mistake, but it doesn't define who you are as a mother. She squeezed my hands tighter. You know what defines you? The fact that you got on a plane and came here when you thought I was a danger. The fact that you faced a murderer to protect your family, which is who you really are. In the weeks that followed, as Derek grew stronger and began returning to work part-time, our family developed a new dynamic. The shock of Tom's betrayal initially felt like it might tear us apart, but instead, it seemed to have shattered pretenses and forced us to be more honest with each other. Jennifer admitted she always felt Tom favored Sarah. Patricia confessed to feeling guilty for not seeing signs of his growing instability during the divorce. We all carry secret wounds that we finally feel safe enough to share. A trial was scheduled for 6 months later, And while it was difficult for all of us to testify against Tom, there was also a sense of closure approaching. Brenda had already pleaded guilty in exchange for a lighter sentence, apparently reluctant to risk a trial where her role in the attempted murder would be fully exposed. Tom, characteristically, was fighting the charges, maintaining his innocence despite the overwhelming evidence. His lawyer argued temporary insanity brought on by the stress of the divorce, but no one who had heard his cold, calculated words in the parking lot believed his defense. During one of our conversations in the hospital cafeteria, Sarah asked me something I hadn't expected. "Mom, do you think you'll ever be able to forgive him?" I considered the question carefully, thinking about all the years of manipulation, the affair, the cruel divorce proceedings, and finally, the attempted murder. "I don't think forgiveness is about him anymore, Sarah," I finally said. "I think it's about freeing myself from carrying his poison in my heart. He's already taken 30 years of my life through marriage, and 2 more years through fear and guilt. I won't give him anything else." When I looked at my daughter, strong, compassionate, resilient, despite everything she'd been through, I realized that while Tom's betrayal had nearly destroyed our family, it had also revealed truths about ourselves that we might never have discovered otherwise. Sarah learned she was capable of incredible strength under pressure. Derek learned his love for Sarah was strong enough to survive literal poison, and I learned that a woman I'd dismissed as a failure was actually capable of extraordinary courage when her family was threatened. 6 months later, on the eve of Tom's trial, I found myself on the porch of the house Derek and Sarah took walks to in the Portland Hills, watching the sun set over a city that had become my temporary home. I had decided to stay in Portland during Derek's recovery and trial preparations, and those months were simultaneously the most difficult and the most revealing of my life. The house sat on a quiet street lined with ancient oak trees, and the smell of rain lingered in the humid Oregon autumn air. Derek was much better now. His blood tests finally showed that his liver was regenerating, and the yellowish color had completely disappeared from his skin. Sarah appeared on the porch carrying 2 cups of hot tea, a tradition we'd developed during those months of healing. She sat in the rocking chair next to me and sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes, watching the shadows grow longer between the trees. "Are you nervous about tomorrow?" she finally asked, her voice carrying the same gentleness that had characterized our conversations since that day deep in the hospital. The trial would be the first time I'd seen Tom face to face since the parking lot, and honestly, I wasn't sure how I'd feel. "Nervous, yes, but also okay," I replied, surprised by my own honesty. Over the past few months, working with a therapist Detective Martinez had recommended, I'd begun to understand that my fear of Tom wasn't just about the attempted murder. It was about decades of psychological manipulation, years of making me feel small and inadequate, decades of walking on eggshells around a man who claimed to love me but treated me like an inconvenience. I think I need to see him in court, hear him try to justify what he did. Derek joined us on the porch, moving with a careful deliberation that still characterized his movements. Doctors said he would eventually regain full strength, but the process was slow and sometimes frustrating for a man who had always been active and energetic. "How do the lawyers think the case is strong?" he asked, settling into a third chair we had added specifically for these nightly conversations. The prosecutor said that with Brenda's guilty plea and testimony, plus all the evidence they found, it should be simple. Brenda's decision to plead guilty and testify against Tom came as a surprise to us all. According to her lawyer, she finally realized that Tom had manipulated her just as he had manipulated me for years. Her testimony revealed that he convinced her that I was a vengeful ex-wife trying to destroy him financially, that Sarah was helping me drain everything he had worked for. He painted himself as the victim of 2 generations of ungrateful women. And Brenda, 15 years younger and desperately in love, believed every word. "The therapist said something interesting yesterday," Sarah said, swirling her tea thoughtfully. "She said people like Dad often create such elaborate justifications for their actions that they start to believe their own lies. She thinks he genuinely believed we were his enemies, that we deserved what he planned to do to us. The idea was both terrifying and, in a way, comforting. Terrifying because it implied Tom's capacity for self-deception was even greater than we imagined, but comforting because it suggested his actions stemmed from delusion rather than pure malice. Over the past 6 months, we've uncovered disturbing details about Tom's behavior leading up to the attempted poisoning. A private investigator hired by the district attorney discovered that Tom had been stalking me for months before he showed up in Portland. He was parked outside my house in Denver, following me to grocery stores and doctor's appointments, documenting my daily routines. He knew when I left work, when I came home, who I talked to, what I bought. The rape seemed almost as bad as the attempted murder itself. Jennifer was particularly shaken by these revelations because Tom had been staying with her family during some of his business trips to Denver. "He was using my house as a base to stalk you, Mom," she tearfully told me during one of our family therapy sessions. My kids would ask why Grandpa spent so much time looking out the front window with binoculars. I thought he was just, I don't know, bird watching or something. The guilt she felt for having unwittingly allowed his surveillance was something she was still processing with her own therapist. The night before the trial, all 3 of my daughters stayed at Derek and Sarah's house. Patricia had flown in from Chicago, Jennifer had driven from California with her family, and for the first time since before my divorce, we were all together under one roof. But this time, instead of walking on eggshells around Tom's moods, instead of carefully managing our conversations to avoid angering him, we were free to be ourselves. The laughter that filled the house that night was something I hadn't heard from my daughters in years. Derek made dinner, a simple pasta dish that was all his recovering system could handle. But it tasted like the best meal in the world because it was made with love and served with confidence. As we sat at the table, Jennifer's youngest daughter, Emma, asked a question that interrupted all adult conversation. "Grandma Margaret, why did Grandpa Tom try to hurt you?" A 7-year-old's directness cut through all our careful euphemisms and therapeutic language to get to the heart of the matter. I looked around the table at the faces I loved. My 3 daughters, my son-in-law, who had nearly died because of my ex-husband's hatred, my granddaughter who deserved an honest answer. Sometimes, Emma, when adults feel really hurt and angry, they make terrible choices. Grandpa Tom felt like life wasn't fair to him, and instead of asking for help or talking about his feelings, he decided to blame other people and try to hurt them. It was the simplest explanation I could give, but it still held true. Emma nodded solemnly, processing this wisdom children sometimes display. But that's not right, is it? Even if you're really, really angry, shouldn't you try to hurt people? "That's right, honey," Sarah said, reaching out to stroke Emma's hair. "Being angry is okay. Hurting people because you're angry is never okay." I watched my daughter explain this fundamental truth to her niece and felt a surge of pride. Despite everything Tom had put us through, despite all the pain and trauma, we were raising a new generation who understood right from wrong. The morning of the trial arrived gray and rainy, typical Portland weather, which seemed appropriate for a somber occasion. I had chosen my outfit carefully. A conservative navy blue dress, professional but not overly formal, something that conveyed respect for the legal process without seeming like I was putting on a show. Sarah wore a simple black suit, and Derek, though still a little frail, had insisted on wearing his best shirt and tie. "We'll face it together," he said, "as a family." The courthouse was an imposing building in downtown Portland, all concrete and glass that reflected the cloudy sky. The media gathered outside, apparently the case of a nurse and a businessman who attempted to murder his ex-wife had attracted regional attention. But the reporter who approached us as we climbed the steps was respectful, asking only if I wanted to make a statement. "Justice will speak for itself today," I said simply, surprising myself with my composure. Inside the courthouse, I saw Tom for the first time since that day in the garage. He seemed smaller somehow, dwarfed in his orange jumpsuit, his hair grayer and his face more lined than I remembered. When he looked at me, I expected to feel fear, anger, or maybe even pity. Instead, I felt nothing. He was just a stranger now, a man who had once shared my life, but had become someone I didn't recognize. The power he had held over my emotions for so many years had simply evaporated. Brenda's testimony was devastating for Tom's case. She described in detail how he convinced her I was evil, how he researched arsenic poisoning, and how he planned every aspect of the crime, including the timing and method of delivery. She admitted she was willing to kill me because she believed I was destroying the man she loved. Her voice broke as she described realizing Tom was lying to her about everything, using her medical knowledge and her desperation to be loved as tools in his plan to commit murder. When it was my turn to testify, I spoke clearly and calmly about the years of emotional manipulation, the lies and affairs, the cruel divorce proceedings. But most of all, I spoke about the impact his actions had on our family, how Derek suffered physically, how Sarah was traumatized, how we were all forced to confront the possibility that someone we loved could be capable of such evil. I didn't look at Tom during my testimony. I spoke to the jury, the judge, anyone who would listen about what domestic violence could become when it was allowed to fester and fester. The verdict came after just 3 hours of deliberation. Guilty on all counts. Tom showed no emotion as the sentence was read, just stared straight ahead as if he were in a completely different place. He was sentenced to 25 years for attempted murder, plus additional time for stalking, conspiracy, and unlawful possession of controlled substances. At 62, he would be in his 80s before he would be eligible for parole, if he lived that long. As he was led away in handcuffs, he didn't look at any of us. It was over. Outside the courthouse, after all the interviews and photographs were completed, our family stood together on the steps, looking out at a city that no longer seemed dangerous. Portland had been the place where our family was nearly destroyed, but it had also been the place where we learned how strong we could be together. "What now?" Patricia asked, voicing a question we were all thinking. "Now," Sarah said, taking my hand, "we go home and heal, and remember that we survived." That night, back at Sarah and Derek's house, we opened a bottle of wine to celebrate, not Tom's conviction, but our survival, our healing, our newfound honesty with each other. It wasn't expensive, nothing like the aged scotch that had started this whole nightmare, but the taste was perfect because it was shared freely, openly, without lies or secrets between us. When I looked at my family, scarred but whole, damaged but healing, I realized that sometimes the worst things happen to reveal the best things about us. We faced evil together and prevailed.